Good morning, Cornerstone. How are you this morning? I think it's going to be a hot day. I just returned from Washington State, where I was for about 3 weeks. I do a combination of ministry and visiting family because all of our family lives in Washington State. Don't ask me how I ended up in Kansas City. It's a long story that you don't have time for this morning. And, you know, what's interesting there is we spent a lot of our time on the eastern side of the Cascade Mountain Ridge. So what most people don't realize is most of Washington State is desert. And we always think of Seattle and all the rain. Well, we were on the desert side where, okay, get this, when the heat temperature is 98, the heat index goes backwards. It's a glorious thing. It's dry heat. 17% humidity, right? When they're out there, we were at family gatherings and picnics, and they were like, "Oh, it's so hot. The heat, the humidity's like 30%." I'm like, 30? Come hang out with us in Kansas City. So then we came home and back to reality. So I'm truly honored and humbled to be here with you this morning. Pastor Sheldon and I had a wonderful conversation when I was in Washington State on the morning of June 20th. And I hope you're praying for him as he's hopefully enjoying a well-deserved vacation, and important to be praying for your entire team. So 4 men are in the hospital waiting room as their wives are giving birth. And a nurse comes into the waiting room and says to the first man, "Congratulations, sir. Your wife has just given birth to twins." He says, "Well, that's odd." He says, "Because I work for the Minnesota Twins." The nurse comes into the third man and says, "Congratulations, sir. Your wife's just given birth to triplets." He goes, "That's crazy. I work for the 3M company." Nurse comes into the third man and says, "Sir, congratulations. Your wife has just given birth to quadruplets." He says, "Well, that's incredible. I work for the Four Seasons Hotel." They look over at the fourth guy, and he's sitting in the corner, curled up in the fetal position. He's kind of banging his head against the wall. I'm like, "What is wrong?" He says, "I work for 7-Up." So yes, it's an exaggerated joke. Like, what man would be in the waiting room these days, right? Kind of an old school thing. You know, small children have this just wild-eyed wonderment of everything where, it's so big as a child. And I think in our childlike faith that it's really important for us to express this reality. God is so big. You know, I contemplate and I envision God sitting on this massive throne. And here's little old me, so small and so tiny I could crawl under a pregnant ant. And in comparison to this God who was so big, and I think of this throne, and I wonder, how could God, who is so big and so massive and so encompassing of everything, ever notice me? How could he ever notice or pay any attention to any challenge I face in life, any issue that I'm concerned of? You know, there is scripture that speaks about how large and how majestic God is on his throne. In Isaiah chapter 6, verse 1, we read these words: "It was in the year King Uzziah died that I saw the Lord. He was sitting on a lofty throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple." Now, it's interesting because the train of a ruler's robe is the measure of his status. So a ruler in those biblical days would be viewed and honored by the substance of his clothing. And here we see this picture of God's robe coming over the edge of his throne and down into the sanctuary and filling the entire temple. Revelation chapter 20, verse 11, we read these words: "Then I saw a great white throne and him who was seated on it. The earth and the heavens fled from his presence. And there was no place for them. So God is so big, his train fills the temple, and when the earth and the heavens attempt to hide from God, there's nowhere for them to go. And then we read this in Hebrews chapter 4 and verses 13 through 16. It says, nothing in all creation is hidden from God. So by nothing, I want you to understand that there's no like escape clause. Nothing means nothing. It means no thing, no event, no thought, no word, no action, no attitude. In all creation is hidden from God. Everything, the complete opposite of nothing, is exposed, naked and exposed before his eyes. And he is the one to whom we are accountable. So then, since we have a great high priest who has entered heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to what we believe. This high priest of ours understands our weaknesses, for he faced all the same testings we do, yet he did not sin. So let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive his mercy, and we will find grace to help us when we need it the most. You see, in this childlike wonder, God is so big, yes. But it's a completely different picture of God on a throne that you may think is maybe just an angry God. This is a picture of a throne of grace rather than a distant ruler. It speaks of a throne from where we find mercy and help in our time of need. I don't know about you, but that's really, really good news for me. Because the greater and the bigger my God is, the more grace and mercy is available to me, and is available to you, and is available to our community. And this morning I must address a reality that's not an exaggerated joke, and it is something that requires our God to be so big. It's my responsibility this morning to talk to you about the reality of a type of slavery that exists in our community and really in communities all across America. It's a type of slavery that we understand in a third world perspective, but right here at home, we refer to it what we call domestic minor sex trafficking. It's a horrible reality happening to American kids right here where we live, and it's impacting so many lives. And as a church in the whole of Kansas City, regardless of denomination, it is our responsibility to be aware of this and to say, God, in your greatness, help us find ways to extend mercy and to extend grace into a world that is so broken. I was so encouraged to see and hear Vanessa talking about your efforts to work with the group where you're reaching out to 400 homeless students, because here's what I need you to understand. The complexities of human trafficking and of sex trafficking in particular can always be broken down just to 3 words, and those 3 words are this: it is always about the exploitation of vulnerability. And what that means is that anything and everything that we can do to lessen the vulnerability in a child so they can't be exploited, it is helping. So what your church is doing, and what Vanessa was talking about in the announcements, working with the 400 homeless students, an adult investing into the life of a student, that's a, you may not even realize it, but you are helping combat this kind of slavery that's happening in our community, because you are dealing with helping to lessen the vulnerabilities in a child that could be exploited. Here's the reality in our community. Arizona State University conducted a study in 15 cities across the United States, and Kansas City was one of them. And they ran decoy ads online, and here's what they were looking for. They were conducting research to determine how many people would respond to purchasing another person for incredibly nefarious purposes, and here's what they found. 14.5% of the male population over the age of 18 was online willing to purchase sex in our community. ladies and gentlemen, that number represents over 106,000 men. See, Romans chapter 2 speaks of the depravity of mankind, and tragically, demand for this kind of slavery is high in our community. So, something you may or may not know about me, I'm a missionary kid who grew up in the country of India. So I lived in India from the time I was 4 years old until I was 18, spent the majority of my childhood and teenage years in India. And years ago, on a very hot day, I was in India, and I was experiencing the sensations of drinking a cola product really fast. I don't know if, have any of you drank a cola product really fast? And you know what happens to you, right? If you drink a cola product too fast, your eyes water, right? And your nose kind of foams a little bit, and your throat burns. So I was experiencing all of these sensations on a very hot day downtown, the capital city of New Delhi, India, and tragically for me, somehow in the bottle of that cola was a dead cockroach that ended up in my mouth. Now, when I tell this story to students in the public school setting, I really go into detail. I think this morning I will spare you those details, and you will all be grateful to me, I am sure. But here's the point. When I go into schools and public settings and talking to students about this issue, because I want to get ahead of this, that the role social media is playing in the lives of our students is devastating. It is devastating. And I want them to know and understand that, listen, a cola is something that can be enjoyed in moderation, but beware of the cockroach factor. See, students are sick and tired of hearing people come in and tell them about internet safety and set your profiles to private, and they tune us out. But when you come in and talk about colas and cockroaches, right? Because I thought it was share a Coke and a smile, not a Coke and a cockroach. And when you can apply these kind of principles to students, it makes a difference. See, here's the reality. Our God, who is so big, created us with desires and dissatisfactions. And here's what we're finding. So many students are looking for someone to pay attention to them. You probably may not be aware of this, but there has been a very popular dance song with students. And the words go, watch me whip, watch me nay, nay. And the primary words to this song are, watch me. Repeated over and over are the words, watch me, watch me. Why is that so popular? Because our generation, our young generation here in America is desperate for attention. And that's a role where the church can step in and fill a gap. And say, we're here for you. We believe in you. Hear me carefully. When, not if, but when a student feels like no one understands me. Raised any kids? You don't understand me. In this current generation, they will and they are finding that attention online through social media apps. And I'm aware of students who spend hours online, literally oftentimes live broadcasting their lives to the world, sharing their desires and their dissatisfactions in great detail. Too much detail. And here's the thing, church, so often our students don't know exactly who they're talking to. They don't know who they're sharing those desires and dissatisfactions with. And remember, when it's all about the exploitation of vulnerability, I have to tell you, there are few places our students are more vulnerable in America today than through what they're doing on social media. I'm going to show you this video because it really is this easy for a student to be lured into what we call the grooming process.
Meeting a teen girl online is actually pretty easy. You can go into any chat room and just start talking. Most of the girls are usually so insecure and desperate for attention.
Attention from older guys is totally flattering. They're so much more mature and understanding than the guys my age.
Age actually works to my advantage. They like to brag to their friends that they're dating an older guy, so I just play along and pretend I'm really
Interested in the same things I am. You can talk forever and really get to know someone without worrying about looks or whatever. That's the best thing about
Chatting seems unthreatening to them, so they lower their guard. After a while, I start talking about how we're soulmates and how lucky we are to have found each other.
Other people don't understand. I know what I'm doing. If you really care about each other, there's nothing wrong with
Meeting them is the goal. Once I get them out of their house, well, that's when things get really interesting.
You know, and the tragic reality is the students that we have to work with who have been lured into this kind of life and then are hurt very badly and become victims, become slaves to this kind of slavery, every single time someone lures them away to meet in person. You see, demand is high because pornography is the engine driving sex trafficking in America. It's a horrific thing to have to talk about in a church setting, but this is the reality where we're living, church. We live in a pornified culture in America today. George Barna Research in 2016 found this. They did a national survey of students across America, and this is what they found among students under the age of 18. They determined, these students indicated on surveys, that it is a greater moral wrong and injustice to not recycle than it is to participate in pornography. The earlier the exposure to pornography, and I hate to tell you this, church, but the average age of exposure now in our country to the first-time exposure to pornography is the age of 8. How's that possible? Well, we all carry these little devices that are easily accessible. It doesn't mean that an 8-year-old even knows to go looking for something like that. It happens very innocently more often than not. But the addiction grabs, and so the earlier the exposure, the sooner the addiction can come, which then leads to someone becoming desensitized to where it's not the amount of time spent with that kind of material, but the increasingly degrading nature of what's required. And what happens then, and eventually it leads to someone acting out. It is the primary explanation for why we can have a study where we find over 106,000 men in our community are willing to go online to harm another person, and especially a child. It's a dark, horrible thing. But let me remind you, God is so big. One of the last school assemblies I did was on May 5th before the school year kind of wound down, and I was in a local high school, and a student challenged me as I was going through my presentation. A boy stood up and he challenged me, and this is what he said. He said this, and I quote, he said, "You can't mean we should stop watching porn. You just mean we should quit acting it out, right?" You know, the tragedy in this is that the exact same presentation, as I went through the presentation, there was a young girl sitting weeping throughout my talk. She came to me in tears at the end, and see, she had met someone online through social media. She was looking for attention, and she found the attention. She was sharing her desires. She was sharing her dissatisfactions with this person, and she thought he was a teenage boy. That's what he told her. That's what his profile picture indicated he was. Turns out, this teenage boy was a 34-year-old man, and he convinced her after many months that they really needed to meet in person because they were going to have an amazing life together. He was going to fulfill her desires and help her deal with her dissatisfactions. And what happened is he had very nefarious intentions for her, and he stole her innocence. And he hurt her very badly, and for 1 year, this young girl became a slave that quickly, that easily. You know why? She was filled with shame because now she's with this 34-year-old man. Now she's stuck, and she doesn't know who to talk to. She feels like she couldn't go to anyone in her church. She told me, she said, "I couldn't talk to my mom and dad about it. I couldn't share it with my friends. I was scared to tell my teachers. I was scared to tell any counselors." And so for 1 year, when we came and did the presentation, all of a sudden something clicked, and she realized that she was a victim. She came to me at the end, and this is what she told me. She said this, and I wrote the quote down because I didn't want to mistake it. She said this: "Everything you talked about in the past 90 minutes is true. It's my story. Thank you for coming. I want to go after this guy, but I need help." And here's what she said that shows God is so big. Here's what this girl said to me. She said, "I just want you to know that I have hope now. I have hope now. See, God is so big. There wasn't anything special about me or our presentation or our ministry, but God had it ordained somewhere that He knew that girl was going to be there on that date, and we were going to go talk about this horrific thing that happened to her a year before. You see, here's what we've learned from presentations in the last 2 school years. I've spoken to 17,034 students. And here's what we found. 75% of upper elementary age students are active on social media. And 70% of those students have connected with a complete stranger online within 2 weeks of a presentation. 85% of junior high students are active on social media, and 80% of those students have connected with a complete stranger within 2 weeks that I've been there doing a presentation. 98% of high school students are active on social media. 95% of those have admitted on surveys that they have connected with a complete stranger within 2 weeks that I've been there doing a presentation. So there's a pattern that's been established here in our community where students are crossing the line into worst case scenarios. 2 things are happening. After getting involved online through social media, they are posting what we will call completely inappropriate pictures of themselves and of others, and then they're meeting a complete stranger in person. 31% of the students we've talked to have done that. So remember, when it's all about the exploitation of vulnerability, we have to pay attention to this. See, all those things are in part the story of this young girl. I need you to know and understand something very, very clearly, that she has asked me to tell her story. Okay? If we can go to the slide where that girl is, that'd be great. It's the slide where she's the softball. There she is. Thank you, Tom. So it's really critical to understand something, and I think Mike may have touched on this last week when he was talking to you about justice and the ministry he's doing in Thailand. It is critically important that in this effort to educate and empower people about this issue, that we do not re-exploit people who have already been exploited. There are so many young victims to this kind of slavery that we deal with here in this community. Their story is not mine to tell. Unless, like this girl, she says, please tell my story. And that's the only reason I can tell you her story. And so I'm going to share it very briefly. At the age of 10 and 11, this girl really was so good at softball, she had college scouts watching her play. But tragically, at the age of only 12, her life took a tragic turn, and her desires and her dissatisfactions were used against her as she began to share them on social media and in person, and her vulnerabilities were exploited in the worst way possible, and she became a victim to this kind of crime that we're talking about. And she entered this life in our community from the time she was only 12 until 3 weeks before her 18th birthday. Her entire teenage years stolen from her. The horrors that she endured are beyond comprehension and completely inappropriate for me to talk about in this environment. She was found on a local website. Remember I told you earlier that over 106,000 men in our community are online looking? Well, girls and boys are being advertised online in our community. And so she was found on a local website, and a sting operation from law enforcement ensued, and she was eventually able to be removed from the life that she had endured for most of her teenage years. This next slide is hard to look at because of the heartbreaking and the tragic deaths of 2 of her children that I'm not at liberty to tell you how they died or why. But then at the age of 13 until 18 and into her adult life, in order to control these victims of sex trafficking, drug and alcohol abuse is forced onto them. As she said to me, she said, Russ, she said, I don't know if I became a drug addict and alcoholic because of what they had just done to me or what was going to happen to me. As she would be in one of our hotels in our community around the city, and from Des Moines to Dallas, moving every 3 days. constantly on call. And that drug and alcohol addiction, the toll and the stress of that kind of life literally ate her heart away. So she's a KU med with 5% heart function. At the age of 22, it took the KU medical team half an hour to revive her as she passed away, and they brought her back. She was rescued. She came out. We've been working with her for years. She approached me at the end of a presentation several years ago. Our family has known her and loved her. We've been working with her for years. And you know, her story and so many others like her are the motivation for us to do anything and everything that we can to help her. I don't know if you noticed, but she was wearing a fanny pack. That's 10 pounds of batteries. And a cord goes into her side, up into her chest cavity. She has what's called a VAD, the mechanical heart, keeping her alive. She's on a heart transplant list. Her story is our motivation because I don't want any other students in our community to have her story. And tragically, I literally could keep you from here to midnight telling story after story after story after story of girls just like her and boys just like her that are here in our community. And church, we can't have this. I'm going to ask you to keep her in your prayers. I'd like to ask you to potentially commit to pray for her 1 minute a day. And if you would maybe do this as you understand this issue, pray for her and just remember her by the letter A. And as a precious child of God, and pray for her, pray 1 minute a day, and pray 30 seconds for her, that the Lord would help her and guide her. She has just recently come through medical detox. She's in a rehab program. We have counseling lined up for her with the grief of the death of her children. We have another counselor lined up for sex trafficking. We have another counselor lined up for drug and alcohol abuse. And we have a mentor helping her with just general life things, because many of the decisions she makes, she reverts back to when she was a 12-year-old girl, when her abuse first started. So if you'd pray for her for 1 minute, pray for 30 seconds, and then pray for 15 seconds for the students that are part of your church, that the Lord will protect them and help them. And then if you think about it, the last 15 seconds, pray for our ministry as we're on the front end trying to stop this. Her situation seems hopeless, but the girl you see on the screen behind me, so here's what's happening. You know, God is so big. Okay, God is so big, and this is incredibly dark, and it seems so helpless and hopeless. But so this girl on the screen behind me, so she's a 7th grade girl, and it's the second or third time I've been in their school. They're bringing me back in every year now because of the impact it's making. And so there was a young girl came to me at the end of a presentation. She was 12 years old, and she says, "You know, everything you were talking about," she said, "that's kind of been what I've been dealing with." And she says, "I've had these boys and men that keep asking me for hot pics." And by a hot pic, it means it's completely inappropriate, okay? And so the hot pic, and so she kept getting pressure and kept getting pressure. She said, "So I finally broke down and just sent the hot pic." You need to know something, that in America today, the average age where students are beginning what we call sexting, the average age that starts is 5th grade. And it's almost become an expected thing in relationships amongst students today. This girl comes to me, she says, "So I finally broke down and I sent the picture." She's like, "Here, I'm going to show you." And no, it's not what you think. I got really creative. So here's what this girl did. She said, "I took a picture of a steaming hot piece of pizza, sent it to this guy, and said, 'Here's your hot pic.'" He said, "And then I blocked him, and then I told all my friends that this creep was asking me for hot pics." Okay, so I told that story. This girl, I come back. She comes up. She's so excited. She comes up to me at the start of the assembly. She goes, hey, you're the cola and the cockroach guy, right?" I mean, listen, if you got to be known for something, why not that, right? And I said, "Yes, I'm the cola and the cockroach guy, but what does it mean?" She said, "It means I got to be safe on the internet and on social media." I'm like, yes, God is so big. He's helping. She goes, you remember the hot pick story? I said, of course I remember the hot pick story. She said, I can't wait to tell you my story. So she comes at the end. She tells me her story. So she has someone who kept asking her for a nude. Kept asking me for a nude. Kept asking me for a nude. She said, here's what I did. So you're probably familiar that there's this lipstick called Nude. Okay, the color of the, okay, so she said, I got a whole bunch of Nude lipstick. And I laid it out in a fan shape on some black velvet. And at the top, I made the shape of a cross. And I took a picture and I sent it to him, said, here's your nude. And then I blocked him and I told everybody what he was doing. You see, what's happening is too many of our girls and too many of our boys are sending the inappropriate pictures. And some of the most heartbreaking stories that are going through my mind right now happen to them. And that's what we want to avoid. We want to educate them and empower. Yes, combating this kind of slavery in our community is overwhelming, but I want to remind you, God is so big in our childlike faith. See, I can either whine and complain about my problems in life, or I can take them to a big God. I want to read to you the words of Isaiah chapter 40, verse 25 to 26. I'm going to read this to you from the Message translation. So it's a devotional translation of the Bible. And it says this, so who's like me? Who holds a candle to me, says the Holy. Look at the night skies. Who do you think made all of this? Listen to these words. Who marches this army of stars out each night, counts them off, calls each by name, so magnificent, so powerful, and never overlooks a single one? So a beam of light from the sun travels at 186,000 miles per second. That's the speed of light. Okay, so at 6 o'clock this morning, when I cursed my alarm, today, Sunday morning, July 9th, my alarm goes off and a beam of light leaves the sun. By 6:08 a.m., that beam of light has traveled 93 million miles. By 6:41 a.m., the beam has passed Jupiter, and by 9:40 a.m., as we were sitting here, it was passing Pluto. By this coming Friday evening, it is leaving our solar system. It will take until July of the year 2020 to reach the nearest star to the sun, which is called Proxima Centauri. In the year 2028, the beam of light only has 20 stars behind it. Traveling at 186,000 miles per second towards the center of the Milky Way galaxy, it will take 32,000 years to reach the center of our galaxy. But it will take 50,000 more years to reach the other side of the Milky Way and leave behind 100 billion stars. It will travel past 50 billion galaxies in what's called the known universe. It will travel 80,000 more years to reach the Magellanic Cloud, which is the closest galaxy to our Milky Way. And at that point, the beam of light is 160,000 years into the future. So our little beam of light that left this morning at 6 o'clock faces 1.8 million years of empty space before it reaches the edge of the Andromeda galaxy, which is close enough to the Earth to be seen by the naked eye. Having traveled 2 million years, and then traveling another 2 million more years, it will encounter open space and travel 20 billion years to reach the edge of space past 50 billion galaxies with 100 billion stars in each galaxy. And at that point, the beam of light has seen what the psalmist said, this is the work of God's fingers. God is so big. And it is this same God who has the very hair on our head numbered. And it is this very same God who cares about every situation you face in life. And it is this same God who understands the challenges and the unique pressures on teenagers living in our community today. And it is this same God who is so big, who for some reason is giving our ministry favor to make a difference in combating domestic minor sex trafficking. And we are honored by that, and we are humbled by it. So it's amazing when I think that James wrote these words in James chapter 4, verse 8, and he said this, "Come close to God, and God will come close to you." Come close to God, and God will come close to you. The same God whose robe fills the temple, from whom the earth and the heavens cannot hide, the work of his fingers, is the same God who comes to us and says, "Bring all your needs, bring all your cares before me." So here's the bottom line in life. Sometimes, like standing in front of this massive, overwhelming screen, sometimes when we get overwhelmed by life, by a message like this on a beautiful Sunday morning, we get completely overwhelmed. And it's so critical to remember that God is so big. Let's pray.